The character of Dracula, created by Bram Stoker in the late 19th century, is the most popular literary character ever created. In movies and television, he beats out Sherlock Holmes, Frankenstein's monster, Tarzan, and Batman, all by a long shot. There is something inherently evil about his character and at the same time inherently relatable. Perhaps that's because when Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, he was doing more than just extending the mythology and lore that already existed. He was creating a unique character, at the same time codifying all the vampire mythology so that future writers could use Dracula as almost a stepping stone for their stories, but also creating a different kind of a monster. It wasn't just an evil undead being. It was distinctly other. You see, Bram Stoker wasn't just rewriting already existing vampire folklore and mythology. He was expanding upon it and building on it. When he created Dracula, he created something that wasn't just a monster. It wasn't just some otherworldly being coming down from Manchester to wreak havoc upon London. No, he was coming from an entirely different country. He had, according to the novel, hair on his palms and a rank, foul odor. He was foreign, he looked foreign, and he sounded foreign. And to make it even more frightening for the average 19th century Englishman, he could mesmerize and steal away their women. Bram Stoker's creation of Dracula elevated the vampire from mere monster in mythology and folklore to kind of a reigning supreme being among the supernatural. He had powers in the novel that oftentimes far exceed the powers he's portrayed to have in movies. He could transform into mist, any number of creatures. He had the ability to do whatever he wanted at any time of day or night. Francis Ford Coppola's version in 1992 was one of the first movies to really show that he actually could be active during the day. Sunlight didn't kill him. It just weakened him. It's also stressed in the novel that while you can't necessarily kill him in any way you want to, one way he absolutely cannot die is from old age. If he stops drinking blood, he will simply get weaker and weaker and older and more decrepit. Once he gets the blood, he will start to invigorate once again. And in the novel, as in, again, Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 version, he becomes younger the more blood he feasts upon. And as he becomes younger, he becomes stronger. There's a virility to Dracula that's missing in most other supernatural monsters. There's a sexuality to Dracula that was never really present in vampiric folklore before Dracula. At least not so much on the surface as Bram Stoker made it. And that's where the movies start to distinguish themselves from Bram Stoker's creation. That is to say, all of the different Dracula movies have a different approach. Some approach the creature as more of an evil force and monster, while others approach it more as a sexually charged, romantic, tragic figure. Since the character has been portrayed so many times on television and on film, there's no way I could possibly break down each and every one and each and every performance by every actor that had ever portrayed Dracula. But I will talk about the big movies, the ones that really set Dracula where Dracula is now in the canon of supernatural horror creatures. Any list of the most important movies about Count Dracula would have to start with Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror from 1922. Although it didn't use the name Dracula, Count Dracula became Count Orlok, it still is through and through a Dracula movie. Now, It's been thought for many years that the director F.W. Murnau, the writer Henry Colleen, and the studio producing it itself did this to avoid copyright infringement with the original work Dracula. However, as film historian David Kalat points out, the original German intertitles actually say adapted from Bram Stoker's Dracula, which would be an interesting thing to put in your original credits if you were trying to avoid copyright infringement. The reason they changed it to Count Orlok is because they were changing the settings and the characters to Germany to make it more accessible to German audiences. Quick shout out to David. He's a fellow film historian who worked with me at Turner Classic Movies. Hi, David. Nosferatu set in place a lot of the modern standards for the vampire, mainly the beastly, horrifying standards. The monster of Nosferatu is not sexually enticing in any way. The creators of Nosferatu went the route of the original mythology and folklore. That mythology and folklore, that the vampire is a beast and a creature of the night, is in play full force in Nosferatu. In fact, they even have him meet his demise by sunlight, which, again, in the novel specifically states doesn't kill him. But that's the route they chose to go in Nosferatu, changing quite a bit from the original novel, but keeping most of the story basically intact. Of course, that didn't stop Bram Stoker's widow, Florence, from suing for copyright infringement anyway, and a German court finally ruling in her favor and ordering all prints be destroyed of the film. However, the court, and very importantly, did not attach any requirement of proof that the prints had been destroyed. And so, most of the prints and copies were not destroyed. Thank goodness. Nosferatu has been remade twice now. First by Werner Herzog in 1979, and next by Robert Edgers in 2024. I highly recommend seeing all three. I think all three are fantastic adaptations of each other and of the original work, Dracula. The next one is, of course, the big one, the famous one, the one from 1931 with Bela Lugosi, based on a stage play that Florence Stoker had approved and authorized. That stage play very much cuts down on the overall story of the novel and makes it more of a gothic parlor drama than anything else. People watching the 1931 Dracula today and expecting to see a frightening modern take on vampires is probably going to be disappointed. First of all, Dracula doesn't even appear in that many scenes, and Todd Browning, the director, made the decision to not show Dracula's demise. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's because it was 1931. Well, that's not actually the case. 1931 was the pre-code era, and there was a lot you could show on the screen in 1931. Here's James Cagney's corpse being delivered to his mother in Public Enemy. Here's a man's body being separated from his hands in All Quiet on the Western Front. You could show a lot in 1931, but for whatever reason, they decided not to show Dracula getting killed in the movie. Even just a shot of him opening his eyes and seeing Van Helsing, and then showing Van Helsing lifting up the hammer and hammering into the stake. They didn't even show that. It's very, very strange and unfortunately very disappointing. The death scene of Dracula has become something standard in Dracula and any vampire movie. Seeing the vampire killed is a part of the thrill of the entire production, so not including that is the biggest strike against the 1931 film. However, the 1931 film absolutely set the standard for how Count Dracula was viewed and portrayed in popular culture. It may not be the best of all Dracula movies, but Bela Lugosi's performance, his voice, his eyes, his movements, and every way Todd Browning decided to frame him absolutely and completely culturally set the standard for the portrayal of Dracula from that moment on. Every other portrayal of Dracula is a variation on Bela Lugosi's performance. Todd Browning did a Spanish language version as well at the same time, which is virtually the same exact movie, done with the same sets and done alternately. It's not as well known, but it is very good, and I would also recommend checking that one out, with actor Carlos Valarius playing Count Dracula in that one, and doing a very good job as well. Now, after the 1931 Dracula, you got variations on the Bela Lugosi created character many times. It wasn't until Hammer came along with their 1958 horror of Dracula that it changed a little bit. In this one, it kind of eschews the entire idea of the original novel's foreign other coming in and taking possession by casting Christopher Lee in the main role. Christopher Lee seems far more like, well, just a gentlemanly Englishman count than he does a menacing foreign other creature. Nonetheless, Horror of Dracula truly reinvigorated the vampire and more specifically the Count Dracula genre. Christopher Lee so embodied the character so well and was so beloved that he played it multiple more times, and today is probably thought of as Count Dracula almost as much as Bela Lugosi. In the 1970s, Dracula the stage play became big again in a revival, this time with Edward Gorey doing the set design and Frank Langella playing the role of the Count. Now, when he did the movie version of it in 1979, it didn't go over too well. The movie looks terrific. It has a beautiful set design, beautiful cinematography, and just an overall great feel. It just doesn't feel much like a vampire movie. And the problem with Frank Langella, as good an actor as he is that he chooses to play Dracula almost entirely as a romantic figure, to the point where he refused to even wear fangs for the role. And since he's just kind of speaking like Frank Langella, has a Saturday Night Fever hairstyle, which coincidentally the movie was directed by John Badham, the director of Saturday Night Fever, it just doesn't seem much like a Dracula movie, despite being named Dracula. It seems like a movie about some guy in England who's good looking and seduces women. We spent a lot of time earlier talking about the sexuality of the Dracula character and what that brought to the vampire mythos. But for me, the 1979 movie version goes too far in that direction and just completely loses track of any of the horrifying elements of the character. Finally, I would mention Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola in 1992. Now, again, there are so many versions of Dracula that you can watch that have been made, and there are so many more that I would recommend. From a lot of the other Christopher Lee ones, to Jack Palance playing Dracula, to Louis Jourdan in the TV version of Dracula. There are lots and lots out there worth seeing, but I will say that in Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, Gary Oldman gives, for my money, the best performance as the Count. He embodies the monstrousness, as well as the sexuality, as well as the tragic romantic figure. He takes everything that Langella was doing, and everything that Bela Lugosi was doing, and everything that Christopher Lee was doing, and combines all three into one kind of all-encompassing character that fits the character of the novel better than anyone else has ever attempted. My problem with the movie overall is that it feels just a bit too disjointed, as if Coppola was rushing to get it down to under 2 hours or 2.5 hours, where really, if he had just gone with every part of the novel and made it into an epic, I think it would have worked so much better. As a result, I think a lot of people who haven't read the book kind of find the movie a bit disorienting at times. But aside from that, the film looks great, has a lot of incredible effects, and it's got Gary Oldman's astonishing central performance. the best performance of Dracula that I've seen in a movie. In 1897, Bram Stoker created the character of Dracula. And to this day, well over 125 years later, the character is as popular as ever, being portrayed in films and television more than any other literary character. This October, treat yourself to as many Dracula movies as you want or can, and if you haven't seen the Nosferatu films, watch all 3 of them. If I had to pick one in particular, honestly, I would go with Werner Herzog's 1979 version. And if I had to pick one version of Dracula for absolute novices, I'd probably say Hammer's Horror of Dracula. For more experienced who want to get a fuller picture from the novel, I'd say go with Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. That's all I've got for this time. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this, I would appreciate a like and subscribe. It helps the channel. And as always, drive safely.